All right, well, Andrzej, thanks for sitting down to have a little interview with us today. I wonder if we can just start with some biographical details, if you can tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up, and then your musical background.
Thank you very much for having me, Tony. I'm a native of Poland, and I spent a lot of time in the United States. I came as a refugee. But I think I still identify with Poland as certain historical and cultural reality. And talking about music, I think my journey towards music occurred by stages, and there's nothing short of miracle in the fact that I'm in music in a professional way. It's not that I'm so bad, it's rather that it was very very unlikely when I consider my childhood that I ended up in music as a sort of a commitment for life. So my parents were not involved in music at all, so there was not much music at my family house. Well, Poland is a little bit different in the sense that the school system is much more structured. If kids want to learn music, they can go to school. There's an admission process on the kids with some musical aptitude are accepted. So this was an idea of my parents that I should go to such a school. So I started at the age of 7, but I discontinued. I got very sick, and it was not possible for me to attend that school on a regular basis. So I dropped. Yet my music teacher, a piano teacher, thought that it would be too bad to see me abandoning music, and she offered private lessons. But I have to say, my parents accepted, but I must say that music was like between 20th and 30th position on my to-do list. I was not very serious. I have to say though that I had a fascination about pipe organ and some fantasies. Of course, there were child fantasies and very naive as I see them now. But I was hooked up, and after a few years, I decided to try an entrance exam to the secondary school of music, and my teacher prepared me for, and I was accepted. And then first miracle happened. My main teacher, who was a pianist, became a fatherly figure for me. It was formative age. He was very tough though. He said, if you do not work, I will make sure that you leave this institution very soon. At the same time, he never required anything that would be impossible for me, beyond the reach. But it was much more than instruction. He conveyed to me his love for music. He taught me how to understand music, how to breathe with music, and without him, I would certainly not be in music in any serious way. And then I started to learn organ, and after 5 years, I was ready for an entrance audition for the Conservatory of Music, which was a big deal. And I was lucky again because I became a student in a class of an organist who was considered the biggest artist in Poland. and he only had 9 students. But I can tell you that after everybody, after a weekly 2-hour-long lesson with him, these were individual lessons, people were just sweating, they were coming. It was very, very intense. Well, sometimes he was disappearing, he was going on concert tours, and but everybody knew what to do. We had lots of things to prepare during his absence. Of course, it wasn't organ. It was a very comprehensive, very well-rounded program. Another very important influence was my friend, my best school buddy before the Conservatory of Music. He was a pianist, and he turned out to be one of the best in the country later. He played about 60 recitals a year. He had a Carnegie Hall performance. He played with symphony orchestras and solo recitals practically on all continents except Antarctica, Antarctica. And so we were friends, and I got to know his entire family. I was a frequent visitor. And his parents were very well-respected pedagogues, music pedagogues, both pianists. And so it was really important for me to see their value system, how they worked, their discipline, their dreams, their everyday life. And we had endless talks about music, about many other things concerning art and the world. And so I was like a family, a member of extended family. And in fact, it's not much of an exaggeration, because Karol, my friend, and his brother Thomas are now my brothers-in-law.
Oh.
Yeah, and in fact, Thomas is a director of his own symphony orchestra. And he's a composer. He just recorded his new big composition, that's Requiem for the World, for symphony orchestra and double chorus. So wow. He's very, very active. And so that was, I think, these were 3 most important factors for me. My piano teacher, the fact that I became a student of a very important personality of organ world and big artist, and my friends who were family-like and were so much into music. But of course, this was about what you call classical music. I didn't get much exposure to sacred music. It was another stage much later. And so then I left Poland, and you know, after I came to America as a refugee, long time ago, about half of my life was in America, and so I've been around for a long time. So I had an opportunity to go to graduate school, finish some degrees, and got into church music. And as a church musician, I discovered gradually sacred music, basically because I was missing so much, a certain dimension in my professional work, and I was I thought that what I saw around in terms of typical music making on the parish level was a bit bland for me, yeah, to put it mildly. And so I was searching soul, and I found some people. There's a wonderful organization, CMAA, and one of our professors from Stanford is the president. That's Dr. Bill Martz. And I didn't know then that he was so involved into church music, but only later I found out, and I learned a lot about sacred music. So it was a gradual process, and I think that's perhaps the most important area for me as a musician right now.
Okay. So that leads us right into our next question then perfectly. So from your perspective as a director, what is the difference in your position between directing people to perform sacred music versus maybe directing people to perform the more classical pieces that your early training consisted of?
I think to compare sacred music with secular music, it's a very thing to do on a general level. I can talk about specific pieces and give you 1,000 reasons why it is secret. That's something that comes from architecture, from design of the detail. But I think that I would say that one important consideration is intent of the composition.
Okay.
And I would say of a successful composition, because sometimes the intent does not come through
Sure.
if you have a problem about a piece of music that in question. But also, and we have to be careful what we mean by sacred music. Initially, when you consider history of sacred music, the definition was very much more narrow. So what was the sacred music then? At the beginning, this was a way to convey the text of liturgy. Mm. So the early Christians borrowed certain traditions from the Judaic worship. So when the text is spoken, it might have an appeal, but when you do this on a single tone, in a process it's called cantillation, which is close to singing, then it resounds better. It's actually more understandable for people in certain spaces, because you illuminate the vowels. So when you say, my sisters and brothers, Jesus Christ has died for your sins, it's okay. But when you say, my sister and brothers, Jesus Christ has died for your sins, the space resounds. Yeah. It speaks back, and it just has more power, and it's more solemn. And then you could make this the tonal material you use for delivering the text more embellished. My sister and brothers. Jesus Christ has died for your sins, which reflects natural distribution of energy of textual phrase, and also punctuation and so forth. So, so in a way, so it's a way to help the text in a non-verbal way to go through and make an impact. So so the sacred music was basically a vehicle of these sacred texts. Nothing less, but nothing more. Only later it grew into, and you have several ways of using the term of sacred music. Sometimes they are not legit, in my opinion. And I think there's a fake sacred music in the sense that people consider whether a piece is sacred or not, so just looking at the text. Why? Because it's easier. It's easier to see, okay, that's St. Paul's, let's say, so that must be sacred then. But sometimes the melody and the way music is set up helps the text. Sometimes it betrays the text. So the text alone does not make a piece sacred by default. It has to, these things have to cooperate. And how it happens, I think there are more people who are able to analyze the language, verbal language, than to analyze what happens with music. It's much more difficult. And music's communication. And so there's a mystery right there. What is the basis of this communication? How is it that music can convey emotions or certain non-verbal content? If it's a good means of communication, it means that you should know what I intended as a composer of a musician. So how? Is it because you learned this and I learned, or so is it like just a convention, or is it through a process of acculturation, or is it something deeper?
Yeah.
And they are, it's a fascinating question. Once in my remote past, I was involved in the interdisciplinary project, research projects that had some dimension of anthropology of culture, But this is, I think there's the answer is not clear cut, and it's not that there's only one mechanism that makes it happen. It's probably several mechanisms. So it is a complex reality. But in terms of conducting, I also believe that what you consider secular music can approach sacred music in its sincerity of expression, and sometimes it tries to capture something bigger. Yeah. What you, from lack of better words, you would call something absolute, and so it might happen. So then I think that I think that there's only one way. If music is a convincing piece of art, we just try to do this as well as we can. And we try to preserve the composer's intention, the whole potential of the piece, and this is the only way to go about whether it's sacred or secular.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about whether the composition is successful or not. That's part of what determines whether a piece can be considered sacred music. So then you also raise fascinating questions about how does one recognize the non-linguistic communication that's taking place through the music. And so that's my next question. From the perspective of a listener, when somebody's composing a piece of sacred music, I assume that they have some reaction, some engagement in mind for the listener. And then what would that be, would be the first part of the question. The second part of the question would be, how does the listener engage in that, especially if they don't have experience listening to sacred music?
Yeah, it goes into the very heart of mystery of music. Yeah. There's also one other area. there's a notion in the official writing of the church on music, a term sensus ecclesia. So this in the style of the church.
Okay.
And I think there's a big problem about this. We don't hear about this because I think there's a tendency just to avoid the idea that church music must sound in certain prescribed way that we can. And on the other hand, there are people who believe this continuous growth. We shouldn't have artificial limits on church music, sacred music, but that it grows from one stem. I think Pope Benedict XVI was very articulate advocate of that school of thought, and I believe that at least it helps to. Well, in a way, it is related to education. If people cannot associate some basic facts about, I'm not even talking about the face of religion, but about anything, and they're making such flagrant errors, so of course it's not working then, because it requires growing within certain culture, or certain stylistic canons, and understanding them. And I think it has nothing to do with even promoting, saying that this is better than anything else. It is about being able to understand that. They have for example, there might be people who don't like Gregorian chant, and I respect that. I think there are so many ways to approach God. I think that chant sometimes give a chance to come closer to the absolute, but maybe not for everybody, and that's all right. But I think that what I'm concerned is that we can say we are educated as Catholics, but we know nothing about it. We don't need to.
Yeah. And
that's not right. Well, so I think it just simply invalidates this assertion that we are educated, because so it's not that we have to accept it as the only touchstone to measure anything, but I think we should at least be familiar with. We should have basic knowledge, working knowledge of these areas, because simply they are important for who we are, where we came from, and it's not about just past history. I think history determines who we are today, and nobody has responsive for all situations. We have to look at the past to find some wisdom to cope with our current problems. But I'm getting ahead. That's a much broader issue.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So it's an issue of formation. I would totally agree with that. I think our lacking in formation in sacred music goes hand in hand with our lacking in formation in a whole bunch of different areas. But I want to grab onto something that you said. And you said that Gregorian chant has the ability to draw us up, from your perspective, into an encounter with God. Can you tell us something about why the music or why the chant phonetically has that ability?
To some extent. Why only to up to certain limits? I remember that one famous filmmaker was working for a very well-known film academy with many candidates, and those candidates had a task to describe what they would like to accomplish through their films. And they were very articulate, page after page after page, you know. They were, and he just looked at this and sighed. oh boy, if they want, if they know so well what they want to accomplish through film, why they just write about this? Why bother to make films? You know, so we can answer to a certain extent. I think that it was pointed out that the rhythm of chant defies measure. It's irregular. And I owe it to Dr. Mart. He said that it's opening towards eternity, much more than music that is based on pulse, the regular beat that is more earthly, because it reminds us passing of time. And also I think that the relationship of that music with silence is important. It's one of my favorite readings of the Old Testament when God wasn't in thunder or other big sounds, but it was in a whisper.
Yeah.
And so in a way, and there's also something peaceful, something soothing, something very healing, and these are very objective effects. I know that some chant was used in therapeutic process, and it was recorded that helped people to become less tense, become more open, and that get overall very positive, almost physiological effect on people. How it's done? The melody is based on what we call the model system, maybe. But how exactly model system helps us to get into realm of God, I don't know, but that's a mystery.
Yeah. The way that you were talking about sacred music is, whereas for much music we can put a meter to it, we can measure it. There's something about sacred music that escapes the definition of measured time. I think that's fascinating. Even that incapability to define the music or to measure the music absolutely pushes the soul that experiences this music to contemplate something that's not measurable.
And again, I have to say that we have to be very careful about what we mean by sacred music. For example, for many people, Handel's Messiah is almost a textbook example of a church of sacred music. It's not. The Messiah, as many other big forms Handel wrote, was written for music theater. Believe it or not, but it was entertainment based on noble topics. Yeah. Talked about some moral principles and God, but it was more like a story that we talk to people after dinner to relax, but also we want to say something edifying and but it's not worship music it's not part of liturgical experience. So that's important to remember, and there are many other examples like that.
Yeah. So if we can move from theory a little bit then into what folks are going to be hearing in this concert specifically. Can you tell us a little bit about why you chose the composers that you did, the music of Francisco Guerrero and Alonso Lobo, and do the pieces that you've chosen directly speak to the feast of the presentation?
Yes. This program is built around specific chants. Beata Dei Genitrix Maria, O Blessed Mother of God, which is the antiphon of the Magnificat of the first Vespers for the Feast of Presentation. So it's directly from this liturgical package around that feast. And it's so the text, which is a praise of, and also a petition for Mary to pray for us, is built about the notion of Mother of God, which goes to the very center of mystery of Christ. This idea of Mary as Mother of God was attacked by people from two different sides. Those who couldn't quite believe that Jesus was human, and those who quite had a problem about accepting Jesus as God, his divine part. Only the Council of Ephesus settled this once for good, and and presentation is saying this is the Messiah. Yeah. So we believe that was prophetic, and so the notion of Mother of God is like a counterpoint to this idea of Jesus as one person. Yep. Of double nature, human and divine. So yeah, that's why I think that's directly connected.
Okay. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about the sacred music of Andalusia specifically. Is there something unique about the way sacred music developed there, the way that Guerrero and Lobo compose?
I would talk about the Spain. Spanish golden age. It was literally golden age. Spain was very rich, and it was a wonderful time for church music. There was the church got a lot of support, and it was developed in many places, and the Cathedral of Sevilla was one of several important centers of this church culture. And Guerrero was one of the biggest names of that period. And Lobo was hired to help him when Guerrero was aging, so he became his assistant in Sevilla, and Guerrero was probably his teacher. We know later that Lobo was also a director of music in Toledo, say in Spanish, right? Yeah. But he came back to Andalusia, and there are 5 polyphonic masses by Lobo, actually 6 of them, and 5 are based on Guerrero's music. So it shows the degree of infatuation of Lobo with Guerrero's music, and so he had a big influence. So that's why I think it makes a lot of sense to present them together. And we don't know much about Lobo, but arguably the biggest name of Spanish music of the time, Victoria, considered Lobo as his equal. So that was a very, very high compliment. And there are actually 2 composers. One is Alonso Lobo, and the other is Duarte Lobo. I thought that they were relatives, but they are not. Oh. Duarte Lobo is a Portuguese composer, but I haven't found any information that would suggest that they were related. Yeah. So I simply, your question is why I chose this music and what's especially interesting. You see, I have to fall in love with music piece.
Okay.
I get fascinated, and so it's some infatuation on my side. Why it happened, I don't always know.
Okay.
I just like this. I think it's a wonderful music, and you know, Spain of the time was very interesting for several reasons. I think that it wasn't. It was very important, and a lot of resources were used to support this music, as architecture and many other art projects. But Spain was relatively far from the center of the style, so it produced its own very highly original forms that were not slavishly copying, you know, these textbook examples of Renaissance music, and so they knew those. Many of these biggest composers went to Italy, like Victoria, but they had enough of distance to that they had this freedom of producing things that were not quite the same. They were distinctly different, although you see that they were from the same root, so that's what's interesting to see these highly original forms that the Spanish culture produced.
Okay, that's fascinating stuff. So last question on the concert that folks are going to hear. I know it's been very intentionally put together, and if you could say something, just a few words about the prayer aspect, entering into the music as prayer.
I think that, simply put, the best sacred music is prayer, and it adds these dimensions that are hard to convey through verbal language. So sometimes we can say several thousand words about, say, Holy Mary, but it's enough to look at Pietà, if we connect with that one. It's also the big if, always. Some people are not sensitive to certain aspects of beauty, and that's all right. You know, we're so there are so many types of people, and they have other ways to communicate with God. But I think that sometimes it's just other mode of communication that opens, enhances our experience, and the best sacred music can help prayer, can make it more authentic, and can actually inspire us. It's about edification, about uplifting, and so we can find this spiritual energy listening to the piece, and we are less, we are more convinced, more sure of just we react to something that brings us into this reality, this realm of God. So that's what I would say. And I think we do not have enough work in our typical Catholic centers to explore this. It's a beautiful asset, and that could bring a lot of people closer to God. Of course, not everybody, and not all people are sensitive. You know, my uncle was a great mathematician, but he was absolutely indifferent to music. It just couldn't exist. It didn't have to exist for him. And so it's a matter of how we are composed as humans, as personalities, you know. But it's a worthwhile effort, because I think we haven't explored this fully, and it's just a great potential in art and music in particular that could be used for pastoral work.
Which is why it's so important to expose people to it, that they may not even know that it's there. So Dr. Andrzej Zahorski, thanks for joining us once again. We look forward to experience the sacred music that you're going to be directing for us at the St. Cecilia Concert. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.
And visit our website, FRESHImage.org, to become a Fresh Image Insider and have our latest resources delivered directly to your inbox.
Until next time, this is Fresh Image, reminding you that you were created to live life to its fullest,
so that you might be a breath of God's fresh, life-giving air to the world.